My name is Lydia Parker. I'm 32, and I thought buying my own beach house in Santa Barbara meant freedom, peace, space, and maybe a little bit of silence after years of family chaos. But that peace cracked the morning my parents arrived, uninvited, dragging my brother's luggage through my front door. "Ethan's moving in, Lydia. You understand, right?" No warning, no discussion. Just a quiet assumption that my house, my money, and my boundaries didn't matter. They said it was family love, but it felt more like emotional blackmail wrapped in fake affection. Stay till the end, when love turns into guilt, and guilt becomes Lydia's silent revenge. The sound of the ocean had always been my therapy. Every morning, I'd brew my coffee, walk barefoot to the deck, and watch sunlight stretch across the water like melted gold. It was my small, earned heaven, a heaven I paid for after 15 years of working as a real estate analyst. No handouts, no help, no shortcuts. My family used to call me the cold one, because I didn't visit every weekend, because I didn't hand out loans, because I didn't say yes to every emotional favor wrapped as duty. But deep down, they never forgave me for leaving home or for succeeding without them. So when I saw my parents' car parked outside my gate that morning, something in me already tensed. They rarely showed up unless they needed something. I opened the door, still in my robe, holding my mug. Mom didn't even say hello. She just smiled, that diplomatic, tight-lipped smile that usually came before bad news. Behind her, Ethan, my older brother by 2 years, stood with his usual swagger, one hand in pocket, the other holding a cigarette he wasn't supposed to smoke near my house. "Surprise," Mom said softly, brushing past me like she owned the place. "We brought Ethan. He's staying here for a while." I froze. I blinked at her, at the 2 massive suitcases behind them, at Dad, who avoided eye contact completely. "What do you mean staying here?" I finally asked. Mom set her purse on my dining table, the one I'd saved 3 months to buy, and sighed. "He's had a rough time, lost his job, his apartment. He needs family right now." "And that's me," I asked quietly. Ethan smirked. "You've got a beach house, Lyd. You won't even notice me." That sentence burned more than I expected. Because it wasn't about a spare room, it was about control. For years, Ethan had been the golden boy, charming, loud, funny. And I was the quiet one, the too serious one. Even now, when he was jobless and nearly broke, my parents still saw him as the one worth protecting. I tried to breathe. "Mom, Dad, you can't just show up and decide this for me." Dad looked up finally. His tone was clipped, defensive. "He's your brother, Lydia. Family helps family. You understand, right?" There it was. That same line they'd used since childhood. "You understand, right?" It always meant, stay quiet, sacrifice again, don't make us feel guilty. I didn't respond, just stared at the ocean through the glass doors, wondering how quickly a sanctuary can turn into a prison. They unpacked anyway. No permission, no discussion. That night, Ethan played loud music from the guest room. He left dishes in the sink, beer cans on the counter, and the front door unlocked. And my parents, they laughed, drank wine, and told me to relax a little. I didn't say anything. But inside me, something began to shift, a quiet storm forming beneath my calm surface. A part of me that had been too polite for too long finally whispered, "They think you won't fight back. Maybe it's time to prove them wrong." The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my blender running. It was 6:10 a.m. That thing was sacred, my morning smoothie, my peace. But now it was Ethan's chaos. When I walked into the kitchen, he stood there shirtless, making a protein shake with my almond milk and frozen berries. "Morning, sunshine," he said, like he owned the place. The worst part, my parents sat at the counter, sipping coffee, smiling proudly. Mom said, "Isn't it nice, Lydia? Feels like old times again." Old times. The phrase made my skin crawl. Old times were when I had to share a room with Ethan because Dad said it would build character. Old times were when I got blamed for things he broke. Old times were when I learned that silence was safer than truth. I poured my own cup of coffee, trying not to shake. "Mom, Dad," I began carefully, "this arrangement can't be permanent." Dad set his cup down with a heavy sigh. "You're overreacting again, Lydia. Always so dramatic. He just needs a roof over his head for a few months." "A few months," I repeated. Ethan grinned. "Hey, maybe a year. Depends how things go." My throat tightened. "You're kidding, right?" He didn't answer. He just smirked and started scrolling on his phone like he'd already claimed the space. That evening, when they all went out for dinner, I finally let my guard drop. I sat on the deck, listening to the waves crash against the rocks below, trying to understand how this happened so fast. A week ago, I was alone and free. Now, my life felt hijacked by people who once called me too independent. I opened my old journal, the one I hadn't touched since college, and wrote, "They don't see me. They see a wallet, a convenience, a daughter who doesn't say no." I closed the book and exhaled, feeling that slow, cold burn of anger travel through me. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was something quieter, sharper. Like a promise forming under the surface. 3 days later, things got worse. Ethan started bringing people over, friends who smelled like smoke and trouble. One afternoon, I came home early and found them swimming in my pool, blasting music from my Bluetooth speaker. When I confronted him, he rolled his eyes. "You're so uptight, Lydia. Chill out. You've got space. Let me live a little." I wanted to scream, but I didn't. Because I'd learned something powerful in my 32 years. People like Ethan feed off your reaction. So I smiled instead. And that scared him more than yelling ever could. That night, I made a decision. If they wanted to invade my space, I'd quietly take theirs apart, piece by piece. I began keeping records, photos, receipts, timestamps. Every expense, every mess, every boundary crossed. It wasn't revenge, not yet. It was documentation, evidence for the storm that was coming. A week later, my parents started guilt-tripping me openly. Mom would sigh dramatically every time I looked tired. Dad would say things like, "You've changed, Lydia. You used to be kind." Ethan would laugh and add, "Yeah, money really does change people." That one broke something inside me. Because for years, I had sacrificed everything, worked double shifts, skipped vacations, paid their medical bills, all without complaint. And now, in my own house, they dared to call me heartless. That night, I sat alone on the deck again. The moonlight hit the ocean in streaks of silver, and I felt something inside me harden, like glass cooling after fire. "If they want to call me heartless," I whispered to the sea, "then I'll show them what a heartless woman really looks like." And just like that, the plan began forming, slow, steady, deliberate. A plan that would make them leave my house on their own. No yelling, no fights. Just cold precision. Because when love is used to manipulate you, the only way to win is to stop playing their game. The morning after I vowed to stop playing their game, I woke earlier than usual. The house smelled like salt and lemon, the way I liked it, and for the first time in weeks, I sat at the kitchen island with a notebook and a plan instead of a storm in my chest. Plans don't need drama. They need patience, records, and quiet moves that feel inevitable when they happen. I started with logistics. If they wanted to treat my house like a charity hotel, I would turn it into a professional space that required rules. I called the local business bureau and registered a tiny consultancy under my name, a legitimate one-person interior consulting brand that could justify an office and client visits. It cost a little money and a lot of my calm, but it gave me legal ground and a reason to set boundaries that would not, technically, be personal. Next, I wrote the rules. Not passive-aggressive notes stuck to the fridge, but a clean, formal, household and professional use policy printed on crisp paper, framed, and placed in the hallway where guests would see it. No overnight visitors without notice. No loud music after 10 p.m., no unauthorized use of office spaces. Respect the shared spaces. Reimburse use of supplies and utilities. It read like a contractor's agreement, not a plea. I left it non-confrontational. I left it neutral. I left it immovable. When Ethan came downstairs later, he half laughed at the framed policy and then scowled when he saw the line about supplies. Reimburse household consumables. He muttered something about me turning into the corporate boss of my own house. I smiled at him like I was handing him a menu. Start paying for what you use, I said. If you want to stay, contribute. He barked out a laugh that had always been designed to minimize me. You're joking. I'm family. Family who borrows my car, I said quietly. Family who pawns things. Family who brings trouble to my door. Contribute or make other plans. He stormed out, but it was the first time I'd felt the wind of consequence brush his arrogance. He wasn't used to boundaries dressed in paperwork and tone. He expected temper, tears, drama. Paper was new. It looked final. I tightened the screws in other ways. I changed the Wi-Fi password and left a single network for my work devices. I scheduled automatic deliveries of critical supplies, detergent, trash bags, coffee pods, that required a payment method. I politely declined to authorize his card for the subscription services he used. I informed my bookkeeping that any shared utilities would be billed to the household ledger, and I placed the ledger on the dining table. When he discovered the Wi-Fi change, he raged. When he found receipts waiting for him labeled household contribution, he laughed, then crumpled the invoice and shoved it under a stack of magazines. I logged the timestamp and the trash pickup sign-in on my phone. Every small refusal, every coded inconvenience I documented. Beyond logistics, I adopted a quiet social engineering tactic. I made the house purpose-driven. If a place was needed for work, for clients, for interviews or meetings, spontaneity and liberties were not acceptable. I started scheduling consultancy calls and small client drop-ins during the week. I hosted an early morning site visit for a local boutique that wanted to film images for a feature. I sent out polite, professional invites. Please note, private property, limited guest access. The first shoot morning, Ethan and 2 of his mates were still in the guest room, hungover and loud. Production arrived with a van, equipment, and a precise timeline. They were punctual, dressed in a way that meant business. Refusing to play the part of the messy lodgers, I asked my crew to please respect the property and gently, my house rules. They nodded and set up. Ethan stared as the photographer moved through the house, arranging pillows, measuring light, moving a side table just so. The way they handled my space, professionally, carefully, as if it were valuable, cut him deeper than any argument I could have thrown at him. He tried to laugh it off, but the crew's presence made his friends shuffle out the pool and sit on the patio in awkward silence. The shoot wasn't about making him uncomfortable. It was about exposing him to other people's standards. When someone treats your things like fragile goods, the contrast is humiliating for people who have long treated them like public property. That afternoon, I sat down with a lawyer to draft a simple guest agreement, a document that formalized expectations and which, if signed, would show acknowledgement and acceptance. It was small, civilized, cold. When I slid it across the table to Ethan the next morning, he scoffed and then, abruptly, his charade of bravado faltered. "What's this?" he demanded. "Terms," I said. "If you want to live here, sign it. If you don't want to, there's a list of nearby shelters and short-term rentals I can give you." He crumpled the paper, but a week later I found it unfolded under his pillow with a shaky signature, more reluctant than defiant. A signature for rent. A signature for accountability. Meanwhile, I cultivated external pressure. Neighbors had complained about loud music before I owned the house. I quietly introduced myself to the Homeowners Association, HOA, and mentioned that a friend's consultancy would occasionally use the property for shoots. I did not embellish. I simply asked about the noise policy and how complaints were handled. When Ethan's friends had a pool party 2 weeks later and music spilled over the hedges, an HOA representative called with calm formality and a polite warning. The echo of a professional complaint system sounded differently than my mother. "Be nicer," At home, my parents' tolerance frayed. My mother came over one afternoon, knife in her hand as if to cut into my new homemade bread and perhaps into my resolve. She took one look at the ledger, the camera, the framed policy, and her smile collapsed into something like fear. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, like someone who'd been handed a list of her own crimes. "For the house," I said. "For me." "For him," she shot back. "You're making him feel unwelcome." "I'm making the house feel like the home I paid for," I answered. "If he can't function here without stealing and disrespect, maybe this isn't the right place for him." Dad, who had always been softer with Ethan, stood with his arms crossed, the map of his own guilt written in the tightness around his eyes. "You're being cold," he said finally, the old weapon. "Heartless, cruel." "You called me heartless when I asked for a little distance," I said. "Look at everything on this table, Dad. I stopped asking. I documented. If family means you disregard the person who built the place, then maybe family needs a new definition." They left that day with clipped words and softer steps. There were no more casual dinners. No visits that turned into demands. The absence of their presence felt like a small victory, not triumphant, but necessary. I wasn't trying to punish them as much as I was reclaiming my center. Ethan stayed, but the tenor of his tenancy changed. He complained less about the rules when they were backed up by invoices and the quiet professionalism of the house. He made attempts to appear reformed. He took up odd jobs. He mowed the lawn. He washed dishes. Of course, it was small theater compared to the mess he'd made, but it was theater nonetheless. And for the first time in a long while, I saw him as an actor trying on new roles. Then came the night that made all the small moves feel like a turning point. I had arranged a charity evening, a fundraiser for a local women's shelter I'd supported quietly for months. It was intentional, an event that would fill my house with people who valued safety, boundaries, and dignity. I sent handwritten invites. I hired a caterer. I made sure the guest list was packed with strong women who ran nonprofits, local journalists, and a few neighbors I'd begun to know. It was the kind of thing that knitted the community to the place and made the house more than a family possession. It made it a public, respectable space. On the night of the fundraiser, Ethan's friends dropped by, drunk and sloppy, looking for the party they assumed would keep going. They were turned away politely by the caterer and an overly cheerful volunteer who explained that the evening was private and invite-only. Ethan littered about like a wounded animal, his face red, his voice rising. "You can't do this," he shouted, pushed by desperation. "This is my house too." "It's someone else's event," the caterer said. "Please leave." Eventually, he pushed, and one of the volunteers called security. A few minutes later, someone from the shelter approached him quietly and said, "We want everyone here to feel safe. You're making guests uncomfortable. You should go." He left in a fury, slamming the gate behind him. I stood at the back of the room watching him go, feeling something folded and small inside me open like a bloom. After the event, guests approached me with compliments and handshakes. "Beautiful work," one of the organizers said, "and thank you for hosting. It means a lot." Another woman hugged me and said, "People like you make safe places possible." Those words lodged into me like gold pins. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about building a space that had meaning and refused to be used. My parents' idea of family had been transactional. Mine was purposeful. 2 nights later, my mother called. Her voice was small, shaky. "We need to talk," she said. "Can you come by?" I thought for a long time before I answered. There was no rush to forgive. There was also no need to punish theatrically. I drove to their house, left the house empty for a few hours, and then went inside only when I was ready, carrying a box of leftovers from the fundraiser, a small offering that felt neither capitulation nor claim. They sat across from me in the living room as if on trial. "You embarrassed us," Dad began. "You let him go too far," Mom said in the same breath. "I made the house what I wanted it to be," I replied. "It's not about embarrassing anyone. It's about running my life responsibly." They searched my face for signs of softness and found only resolve. For the first time, Mom's eyes glistened not with accusation, but with a kind of regret I'd never seen before. It's a dangerous thing to see the people who raised you recognize their own failures. It opens old wounds that are hard to stitch. "Are you trying to make me feel bad?" Mom asked finally, not trusting her own tears. "You used to be so sweet." "Sweet," I echoed. "Sweet got taken advantage of for years. Sweet meant paying for bail, paying for rent, paying for excuses. I am not sweet anymore. I am steady." They wanted the old sweet girl back, the one who would hush discomfort with laughter and take insults like water. But I was done. I left their house with no reconciliation promised and no thunderstorm of drama. It was quieter, cleaner, like a wound bandaged and left to heal on its own. That night I walked back into my house and shut the door behind me. The ocean glowed in the distance, indifferent and rhythmic, as if it had never been a witness to my fight. I made tea, sat by the bay window, and for possibly the first time in years, felt entirely present in the life I had built. Not because they had left, but because I had made the choice to hold space for myself. The path ahead was not about vengeance. It was about clear boundaries and a community that respected them. It was about teaching people that claiming your life is not cruelty, it's courage. And somewhere between the ledger and the charity event, between the signed agreements and the new Wi-Fi password, my family had learned that there would be consequences to treating me like a resource. But consequences have a way of turning into new beginnings. I didn't know yet whether the quiet would hold or whether new storms would arrive, but I felt ready. For the first time, my house creaked with the comfortable sounds of my own living. Dishes placed neatly, music that matched my mood, the low murmur of work going well. It felt like a life reclaimed, and that felt inexplicably like victory. The night after the fundraiser, silence had a weight to it. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that feels like an empty room remembering an argument. The air still smelled faintly of candles and ocean salt. The champagne glasses from the event lined the counter like ghosts of laughter. I should have felt triumphant, but I didn't. Instead, a strange ache settled under my ribs, not guilt exactly, but a hollow where family should have been. Because even when people hurt you, the longing for them doesn't vanish. It just sits there, quiet and heavy, like something you keep meaning to throw away but can't. I washed the glasses one by one, not because they were dirty, but because I needed movement. When I finished, I went to the deck and watched the tide creep up the sand. That's when I noticed a light flickering from the guest room, Ethan's old space. He'd left the night of the fundraiser in a rage. I hadn't heard from him since. But the light was on, and the window slightly open. My pulse picked up. I slipped off my slippers and walked quietly down the hall, the floorboards cool beneath my feet. When I reached the door, I paused. There was no sound inside, only the soft hum of the ocean. I turned the handle slowly. The room was empty, but not untouched. Drawers half open, my grandmother's framed photo missing from the nightstand. And on the bed, a folded paper. It wasn't the guest agreement I'd made him sign. It was something else. My name was written on it in shaky handwriting. I sat on the edge of the bed and unfolded it carefully. "Lydia, you win. I don't belong here. Maybe I never did. I know you think I'm selfish, and maybe you're right. But Mom and Dad never told you the truth about why they brought me here. I didn't just lose my job. I owed people money more than I could ever pay. I thought I could handle it, but they showed up at Mom and Dad's house, threatened them, said they'd take the house, everything. That's why they pushed me on you. They didn't want you to know. They thought if I stayed here safe, quiet, the problem would go away. I made a mess, Lydia. But I never wanted to drag you into it. I'll fix it. Just don't hate them too much. They were trying to protect both of us in their own twisted way." "Ethan." I read the letter 3 times before I could move. The paper trembled in my hands. The anger I'd been feeding for weeks started to crack under something heavier. Confusion, sadness, maybe even pity. I'd built this entire fortress to keep them out. And suddenly, I realized they hadn't invaded out of arrogance. They'd done it out of fear. Still, that didn't erase the manipulation. They'd hidden the truth because they assumed I wouldn't help. Because they still saw me as the outsider, the daughter who left, who didn't understand. And yet, even in his disaster, Ethan had managed something I hadn't expected from him in years: honesty. I placed the letter back on the bed and sat there for a long time, staring at the waves beyond the window. Maybe this was what growing up really meant, realizing that people can love you and still wound you, protect you and still betray you, apologize and still not deserve a second chance. I closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet, "You're still accountable, Ethan. All of you are." The next morning, I called my parents. Mom's voice was shaky. "Lydia, you got his note." "Yes," I said flatly. "You should have told me." "We were afraid," she whispered. "You've always been so independent, so strict with boundaries. We didn't think you'd understand." "Understand what? That you lied, that you used my house like a hiding place." There was silence on the line, the kind that carries regret too fragile to touch. Dad's voice cut in then, tired, rough. "We were wrong. We just didn't want to see him destroyed. We thought he'd be safe there with you. You're stronger than any of us." The compliment landed like a bruise. "Being strong doesn't mean being used," I said quietly. "You could have come to me honestly. I might have helped. But instead, you made me the villain for protecting what's mine." Mom began crying softly. "He's gone, Lydia. He said he'd fix it, but I'm scared of what that means." "Do you know where he went?" "No," she whispered, "only that he took his father's truck." The next days stretched into a blur. I checked the guest room constantly, half expecting him to walk back in with that arrogant smirk and some new excuse. But he didn't. A week later, I found out through a mutual friend. He'd driven north, trying to sell some old equipment, working odd jobs. No arrests, no overdoses, just silence. For the first time in years, I didn't chase after him. Didn't clean up his chaos. Didn't call or beg or plead. I just waited. And in that waiting, I began to rebuild. I started volunteering at the shelter I'd hosted the fundraiser for. At first, it was just weekends, sorting donations, helping with budgeting. But the women there changed me. They weren't victims. They were survivors, people who had lost everything and still showed up to rebuild piece by piece. One woman, Maria, told me something that stuck. She said, "Sometimes the people who hurt us are also the people we taught how to hurt us." It was brutal and true. I had spent years teaching my family that I would always say yes, that I'd bend before I'd ever break. So when I finally said no, it shocked them. And maybe, in some small way, I was teaching them something new now, how to stand on their own without leaning on me. Then, one afternoon, I received a letter. A real one, stamped, folded, written in messy blue ink. No return address. I opened it carefully, heart thudding. "Lydia, I'm working at a marina in Oregon. It's not much, but it's quiet. I'm sober now. I fixed one of Dad's old debts, sold my bike, and sent money back to them. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say thank you. You were right. Boundaries aren't cruelty. They're mercy for people who need to grow up. Maybe one day I'll come back and see you. Not as a burden, but as someone who finally learned how to stand on his own. Take care. Ethan." I stared at the letter until the words blurred. Then I did something I hadn't done since childhood. I cried. Not because of sadness. Because for the first time in my life, my brother's words didn't hurt. They healed. Months passed. The house slowly returned to its rhythm, calm mornings, gentle ocean breeze, no noise except the waves and my thoughts. Mom and Dad called occasionally, their voices softer now, more careful. We didn't talk about blame. We just talked about the garden, the neighbors, little things. And that was enough. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the sea orange, I sat on the deck with a cup of coffee and thought about everything that had happened. How easy it is to call someone heartless when they stop giving you what you want. How quickly love turns into guilt when boundaries appear. And how strength, real strength, isn't loud or angry. It's quiet, unshakable. I thought about the night they showed up with his suitcases. How small I felt then, and how powerful it felt now to finally say, "This is my life, and no one gets to occupy it without respect." A few days later, I received one more surprise. A delivery truck pulled up outside my gate. The driver carried a small wooden box with my name carved into it. No sender. Inside, wrapped in newspaper, was Grandma's framed photo, the one missing from Ethan's room. And beneath it, a note. For the woman who finally made the house feel like home. I smiled through tears. Maybe forgiveness doesn't come all at once. Maybe it comes in moments. A phone call, a letter, a returned photograph. I placed Grandma's frame back on the nightstand, exactly where it had always been. The light hit the glass just right, making her eyes gleam like she was still alive, still watching. And in that quiet room, surrounded by the echoes of a family I was still learning to love from a distance, I finally felt it. Peace that wasn't borrowed, begged, or forced. Peace that I built. Outside, it had been 8 months since Ethan's trial ended. 8 months since Lydia's parents walked into her beach house trembling with regret, like a promise to myself. And since she'd found peace in silence rather than war. But the truth is, the seasons had shifted. I just stopped bleeding. The summer salt air now cooled into autumn's calm. The mornings were crisp, the ocean mist curling around the edges of her windows like unspoken poetry. Maybe Lydia's art school had grown, not just in students, but in heart. What began as small weekend classes had turned into a full community space. I woke to the sound Kids who once feared going home now found peace in colors and canvas. Women from broken marriages came to paint, cry, and start again. Even men, quiet, ashamed, uncertain, found healing in the sound of brushes and shared stories that used to suffocate me. The world outside called it therapy through art, is like the ocean, but Lydia called it grace. You can't trust it to stay still. One Saturday afternoon, it started. The school buzzed louder than usual. Kind of ordinary. The local news channel had arrived. A feature story about the artist who turned betrayal into beauty for the shelter. When Lydia wasn't comfortable with cameras, Mom's name, but she agreed. She knew the story wasn't just hers anymore. It was for every person who'd ever been silenced, betrayed, or told that love meant surrender. But something inside the interviewer, maybe a young woman named Chloe, compassion, smiled as she adjusted her mic. "So, Lydia, Miss Hale," her voice she began immediately. "People online call you the woman who forgave the storm." I froze. "How does that feel?" "What? Why?" Lydia laughed softly. "It's about your father," Strange. She whispered. "I didn't plan to forgive the storm. I just refused to drown in it." Slightly off balance. Chloe grinned. "Beautifully said. Your brother's story, it was all over the local papers last year. Now, but the doctor Do you ever regret how it ended?" Real rest. Lydia's eyes flickered. "We thought." "No, because it's still not over. Healing doesn't end with punishment. It begins with understanding." "While, honey. Until the room fell silent for a beat. In a hotel if that Even the children stopped painting to look at her. "Come here." Lydia smiled at them and continued, her voice softer now. "I'd heard the night they brought I used to think family was supposed to protect you. I gripped the Now I know real family doesn't always share your blood. Sometimes, of course, it's the people who walk in when the rest walk out." There was a quiet clap from one of the mothers in the back. Then another. I walked down. Within seconds, the whole room was filled with gentle applause. The sand glistening under Lydia felt her throat tighten. I thought her heart flutter with something she hadn't felt in years. Pride, the without guilt. Always said yes. That evening, after the cameras were gone and the children had left, Lydia sat by the open studio door. And then, sketchbook in hand, I'd become. The sea breeze drifted in, carrying whispers of salt and sunset. Doors you choose when to open. A shadow appeared at the doorway. Still, the thought of Dad being her father. It cut through all that. He looked older, softer somehow. Because no matter his gray hair caught the light like silver threads. It still pulls at the same old strings. Lydia said quietly. "I didn't sleep. You didn't tell me you were coming. Every sound I didn't plan to felt like a question. I was driving by. I didn't want to, and I thought maybe I'd see you for a minute." The next morning, I called. Lydia smiled faintly. "A minute's good," I said. He stepped inside, glancing at the paintings. "I'll help. You've built something beautiful here, Lyd. Something real." "Of course," she said. "I had to," relief flooding her voice. "Otherwise the pain would have eaten me." He nodded, eyes glassy. You know, when I
And a
saw
part
you
of me,
stand up in
the old
court that
part,
day,
wanted to
when you
comfort
spoke
her.
about truth and respect,
But the new part just
I
nodded
realized I'd
quietly and
never
said,
really understood you before.
"Drive safe."
You were never the difficult
arrived
one.
2 days later.
You were just the one who refused
When I
to live
opened the
small.
door,
I almost didn't
Lydia looked
recognize
down,
them, blinking fast.
Mom looked
That means
smaller
more than you
somehow.
know. Tired in a way
He
makeup
hesitated.
couldn't hide. Your mom been
Dad
better.
walked
We've been
slowly,
going to family
his hand
counseling.
pressed against
Ethan
his
too.
chest.
His once
Her
commanding
eyes
presence
widened slightly.
replaced by a
He
kind of
agreed.
fragile stillness. Her father nodded.
"You look well,"
It's not
he said,
easy.
managing
He's
a faint
angry
smile.
mostly at himself,
"You
but he's
too,"
showing
I
up.
lied.
That's something. The air between us
Lydia
was leaned
polite,
back in her chair,
careful,
exhaling.
almost brittle.
Good. Maybe
I
he'll
led them
find
to
his
the
own
guest
peace
house.
someday. The same when Ethan had once. Her
filled with
father reached into
chaos,
his coat and
now
pulled out a
spotless,
small
quiet,
envelope. Peaceful. He asked me to give you this.
"It's beautiful,"
Mom
Inside
whispered.
was a folded
You've done
letter.
so much with this
Written
place.
in
Ethan's familiar, messy
home.
handwriting. I said simply. She hesitated
The days
before
that
opening
followed
it.
were strange.
Her father turned to leave.
Dad
mostly rested. I'll give you space,
Mom
he
cooked
said
small
softly.
meals
And left
when the
them
door
on his
closed,
bedside table.
Lydia
Lydia
like
unfolded the
offerings.
letter slowly. I visited each morning.
Lydia
Checked on him. I've had a lot of
Talked
time
about
to
the
think
weather,
about
the
the
ocean,
house,
about
the
anything
lies,
that didn't
the way
reopen
I
old
twisted
wounds.
things to make myself
But
the
by the
victim.
third day,
You were
the
right.
silence between
I
us
hated your
became too
success
loud to
because it
ignore.
reminded me of everything
He
I
called
could have
me
been
in
if I
while
hadn't
Mom was
chosen
out for
shortcuts.
groceries.
You don't
His
have
voice
to
was
forgive me.
hoarse.
Just know I'm trying to be
Lydia, sit
someone I'm
down.
not ashamed of. I did. Maybe someday.
He looked at
I'll
me
earn
for
a
a
place in
long
your
time.
peace. As if trying to
Ethan.
recognize the daughter he'd
Lost
Lydia's fingers
somewhere
trembled
between pride
slightly
and
She
expectation.
didn't cry this time.
"I owe you an
Instead,
apology,"
she smiled
he said
faintly,
finally.
the kind of smile
I
that
didn't
comes
move.
from letting go. Not just for what
She
happened
looked out
with
at the
Ethan,
ocean
and
for
whispered,
everything.
Peace
My
isn't
throat
earned,
tightened.
Ethan. It's chosen.
"You don't have to."
2 weeks later,
Yes, I
Lydia
do.
was invited to speak at
His
a local
hand trembled
conference.
slightly
Women
as
who
he reached
rebuilt
for the glass
themselves.
of water beside him.
She almost declined.
I spent my
afraid
whole
her
life
story
trying to
was
be the
too
kind of
personal,
father who
too
fixed
raw.
things.
But
When I
then
couldn't
she
fix
thought of
Ethan,
Ella,
I
of the
used you
mothers in her art
instead.
class,
You were
of
the
the
easy
quiet
one, the
strength that had
strong
carried
one.
her this far.
I
leaned on you when
should
when
have
she
stood
stepped
on
onto
my
the
own.
small stage, the
His
lights
voice
were warm
cracked.
on her face. And when you
Tried
rows
to
of
set
people,
boundaries,
strangers,
I called it
watched,
disrespect.
waiting. When you asked she
for
began with a
peace,
deep
I called
breath.
it distance.
I
But
used
the
to think
truth is,
betrayal
I was
destroyed
afraid
people.
of
losing control. Now I know it only
For a moment,
destroys
I
the
couldn't
version of
breathe.
you that allowed it. Because this was
There
the
was
man
silence.
who had never said sorry
Then
for
she
anything.
continued,
Her voice steady
Dad.
but full of emotion. He looked up.
Tears
When my
caught in
parents
his
asked me to
lashes.
give up my home,
You didn't
the one I
deserve
worked
any of
years
it.
to buy.
You deserved
I thought they were
parents who saw
choosing
your
my
strength
brother
as
over
something
me.
to protect,
But
not
life has a way of
exploit.
showing you that pain
felt
is
something
just
in
a
me
bridge.
crumble.
The anger,
A bridge
the
from
from who you
resentment
were, the old
to
who
who
you're
I'd
meant to become,
carried
like armor. She paused,
"I forgive
looking
you,"
into the
I said
faces before her,
quietly, "but I
tears,
can't forget,
smiles,
and I won't
understanding.
go
back to the way things were. So if you're standing in the fire
nodded
right now,
slowly.
don't run from it.
I don't
Walk
want you to,
through it.
just don't shut
because
me out
sometimes
completely.
peace
Not
isn't
yet.
found in avoiding the storm.
I smiled faintly.
It's found in learning how to
You earned
dance
the
in the
key
rain.
to the door.
But I still
The crowd
decide
rose
when
to
it
its
opens.
feet.
Applause
He
thundered
laughed
through the
softly.
hall. A tired, broken
And
laugh.
Lydia,
standing there,
"That's
realized
fair."
she wasn't just
That
surviving
night,
anymore.
for
For the first time in years, she was living.
I sat outside with my
Later
parents
that
after
night,
dinner.
back at the beach,
The
she
stars
stood at the
shimmered
edge
over
of the
the dark
shore.
sea.
The wind
We didn't
tangled
talk
her
about the
hair.
past
The
or the
moon
pain.
painted silver trails
Just small
across the
things,
water.
the garden,
the smell
she
of
whispered,
sea air, as if to
the
the
sound
sea.
of the
waves. Maybe this
And
was
somehow,
never about
that
revenge.
felt like the truest
Maybe it
kind
was
of
always
healing.
about return,
Not in apologies
returning
or
to my explanations, but in a single
quiet
tear slipped down her
coexistence.
cheek, caught by
Still
the
deep
wind and
inside,
carried away. I knew this peace was temporary. She smiled. Because in that
secrets in my
quiet,
family
sacred moment,
had a way of
Lydia
washing
finally
back
knew.
to shore.
She hadn't
And
just
one of them,
reclaimed her house.
one I hadn't seen coming,
She'd reclaimed
was
her
already
heart.
making its way toward
The sea
me.
was calm that morning.
The next few
unusually
days
passed
calm.
in a rhythm that felt almost
Waves
unnatural.
rolled
Gently across the
calm,
sand,
quiet,
like the
almost
world
too
itself had
peaceful.
finally exhaled. Dad seemed to be recovering inside her
well.
studio.
Mom
Lydia
smiled
arranged
more
new
often,
canvases
and
against the
sometimes
wall. I even the
caught
smell of
myself
paint
laughing
and
at old
coffee mixed in
memories.
the air. But peace she was
always has a
preparing for the
price.
next art exhibition.
And mine came
Shades
on
of
a
Healing.
Sunday morning.
A collection
I woke
inspired
early,
by her
sunlight
journey, bleeding through the
Each
curtains.
painting
carried a
The
piece of the
ocean
past,
outside was calm,
layered with
the air
forgiveness
heavy
and
with
light,
salt
and stillness. She didn't expect anyone
I made
special to
coffee,
show up that
like I
day.
always did,
The event
and
was
took 2
small,
mugs to the guest
locals,
house.
students, a few
When I
press
opened the door,
photographers.
I froze.
But when she turned toward
Mom
the
was
door,
on the phone,
with her breath
whispering,
caught,
urgent,
the kind
Ethan.
of whisper that means someone
He's
stood at
hiding
the
something.
entrance, hands in his
She didn't
pockets,
see me at
hesitant.
first.
moment. He looked thinner,
No, she
quieter,
doesn't know,
like life
she
had
said
carved
quickly.
humility into his
I'm
face.
trying to find the right
For a
time.
moment,
Yes,
neither
I'll
of them
handle it.
spoke. Just please give us
Then
a few
Lydia
more
nodded.
days. You
A
came.
pause.
Then, he gave a nervous
I
smile.
know what we agreed,
Yeah,
but
I
she's
wasn't
been
sure
through
if I
enough
should.
already.
You're here
My
now,
name wasn't
she
said,
said softly.
but it hung there
That's
between
what
the
matters.
words, invisible,
Ethan's
undeniable.
eyes roamed across the paintings.
When she turned around and
scenes
saw
of the
me,
ocean,
her face
storms,
drained of color.
a lone house against lightning.
Good
He
morning,
stopped
honey.
at one.
I didn't hear you
A
come
simple
in.
image of a woman
set
standing
the
by the
mugs on the
shore,
table,
her
staring.
reflection stretching into the
Who
waves.
were you talking to?
Beneath it was the
Just-
title.
just a friend,
Still standing.
she stammered.
An
He
old
exhaled
neighbor
slowly.
checking in on your dad. That one's about you, isn't it?
She couldn't even lie cleanly
Lydia
anymore.
smiled faintly. Mom,
I
maybe.
heard you. You
Or
said
maybe
she
it's
doesn't
about
know.
everyone who ever
What do I
had to
know?
rebuild themselves.
Her lips trembled.
He nodded, his voice
It's
small.
nothing, really.
I've been sober for 3
Don't,
months.
I said
Been doing the
sharply.
counseling.
Not again.
Trying to
Not
start
after
again.
everything
we've been through. I heard, she said.
She sank onto
Dad
the
told me
couch,
I'm glad
rubbing her
Ethan.
hands together like she was
He
trying to
hesitated.
erase guilt
I don't
from her
expect
skin.
forgiveness. It's Ethan.
I know,
She finally Lydia's
whispered.
eyes softened. But
My
I hope
stomach
you
turned
forgive
cold.
yourself.
What
He looked
about
away,
him?
blinking fast. I'm
He's in
trying
trouble
every
again.
day. Of
course.
pause. Then he pulled
course
something
he
from his
was.
jacket, a
I didn't
tiny
say
folded
anything
paper.
for a full minute.
This
I
was
just stared out
yours.
the window,
You gave it to me when
watching
we
the
were
waves
kids.
crash
I
against the
found it in
shore.
one of my old boxes.
Because I already knew
He
where
handed
this
it to her.
conversation was
The
going.
paper was yellowed and
He
creased,
called us 2
but
weeks
Lydia
ago,
recognized
she
it
said softly.
instantly. Her
He's in
childhood
debt, Lydia.
handwriting,
Serious
crooked
debt.
and innocent.
He got involved with the wrong
Ethan,
people.
no matter
He
what
said they've
happens,
been threatening
you'll always
him.
be my brother.
So you brought this to my
Don't get
doorstep.
lost, okay?
Again.
Lydia
We didn't
stared
want
at it for a
to,
long
she
moment.
said quickly.
Then tears
But he
filled
has
her
nowhere else
eyes,
to
not
go.
from
He
pain,
begged us not
but
to
from
tell
something
you.
softer, deeper.
And you lied to me.
She
Again.
folded the note gently.
He's still your
You did
brother.
get lost, she
The word
whispered,
brother
smiling
hit me like a
sadly.
slap.
But you found your way
No,
back, I said quietly.
Ethan swallowed
He's a grown
hard.
man who's been using
Because you
that
stopped
word as a
fighting
weapon
me his entire
You started
life.
fighting for yourself.
She
and that
flinched.
made me realize what I'd
Please,
done.
Lydia.
He's scared. They stood
He
in
just needs a
silence
little
for a
help.
moment. Two people
How
who had
much?
walked
I
through the
cut in.
same storm,
What?
finally finding calm
How
on
much money did
opposite
he ask
shores.
for?
Then
She
Lydia
hesitated,
said,
which
Would you
told me
like to stay
everything.
for the exhibition?
Mom,
He nodded.
20,000.
Yeah, I'd like that,
she whispered. Just
that
to get
evening,
back on his
the
feet.
gallery filled with quiet
I laughed,
admiration.
the kind of laugh that isn't
People
funny at
whispered
all.
softly, pointing at the
$20,000.
paintings, reading
Do
the
you even
quotes
hear
beside
yourself?
them. Lydia's
Tears
art
filled
had
her
become
eyes.
more than colors.
He's our
It had
son.
become conversation,
And I'm your
empathy,
daughter,
healing.
I said,
my voice breaking.
One woman approached her,
The one who paid your
teary-eyed.
bills, the one who took you
Your
in,
work,
the
it
one
feels
you've been
like
lying
forgiveness,
to, she said.
When does that matter?
Lydia smiled.
I walked out before she
That's
could
all I
answer.
ever wanted it to feel like.
The air outside felt
When the
heavier
event
than
ended,
before.
Lydia
Thick
stepped
with something I
outside for
couldn't
air.
name.
Anger. The night was
Betrayal,
cool, stars
exhaustion.
bright over the horizon.
I sat on the edge
She
of the
stood
deck.
near the ocean
The wood
rail,
warmed
her
beneath my
reflection
hands.
glimmering in the glass windows.
For a long time, I just
Her
listened.
father joined
to the
her,
wind,
slipping
the
his
water,
hand into
the
hers,
faint sound of my
something he
father
hadn't done
coughing
since she was a
inside.
child. Then behind
I'm
me,
proud of you,
I heard
he
footsteps.
said
softly. You heard, she
Didn't you?
smiled.
Dad's
Thank
voice
you.
was low.
He nodded
I
toward
didn't turn
Ethan, who was
around.
speaking to one of the guests
Yeah.
inside. He's
fine.
changing, slowly,
I told
but
her
he's
not to call
changing.
him.
But she's a mother. I can
You
see
know how
that,
she is.
Lydia whispered.
And what about
Sometimes
you?
losing
I
everything
asked.
teaches you
What
what
do you
really
want me to do?
matters. Write another check. Her father
Pretend
looked
I
at her
don't see
with
the
quiet
pattern.
pride. You taught
No.
all of us that. He sat beside
Weeks
me
passed.
slowly. The old pain
Life
visible
slipped
in
into rhythm
every
again.
movement. Morning tides.
I want you to say
Laughter
no.
in the
For
studio.
real this time.
Weekend gatherings with her parents.
That made me look at him.
The fractures in
You're
their
serious.
family hadn't disappeared.
I'm done
They'd
enabling
simply
him,
been filled
he
with
said.
honesty.
If I have
And
any
that was
regrets,
enough.
it's that I taught him to depend
One
on
evening,
everyone but
Lydia
himself.
sat on her porch with her journal.
The ocean roared
the same
below
one
us,
she had once
as if
filled with
echoing his
anger and
confession.
pain.
He's
Now
coming here,
its
isn't
pages
he?
carried
I asked.
gratitude. Dad, she
Nodded
wrote
once.
slowly, her words gentle
Tomorrow.
and reflective. I closed my eyes. I used to think peace was something you
tomorrow,
found
we
after
end
the
this.
storm. That night, but now I
couldn't
know.
sleep.
Peace is the storm
Memories
learning
kept
to stop
flashing.
fighting you. Ethan at 16.
I'm no longer
stealing
angry.
money from my wallet. I'm awake. Ethan at 20. The
Calling
sound of the
from
sea
jail
filled the
because he'd made
silence
a
that
mistake.
followed. Ethan at 30. She closed her journal
showing
and
up with a
smiled.
smirk and another story.
The next morning, as
Every
dawn
time,
painted the
I
sky
forgave
gold,
him.
Lydia walked
Every
barefoot
time,
along
I
the
paid the
beach,
price.
her ritual of renewal.
But not this
time. The waves
This time,
whispered
I would
secrets
make him
against her
face
ankles.
himself.
The horizon
The next
glowed like
afternoon,
forgiveness itself.
a silver sedan pulled
For
into
a
my
fleeting
driveway.
moment, she imagined
I
her
watched from
younger
the
self
window as
walking
Ethan stepped
beside her.
out.
Look, the Lydia
thinner,
who once
older,
cried in this
desperate.
same sand,
He walked
believing
up the
her
porch
world had
steps with
ended.
a forced
smile. She whispered to that
Hey,
version of
sis.
herself. Don't, you
I
made
said
it.
coldly.
The wind
He
carried her
froze.
words out to sea, soft
Okay,
and sure.
so we're doing this the hard way.
Months later,
The
Lydia's
honest
art
way,
studio
I
expanded into a full
You lied, you
foundation.
stole,
you
The
ruined
still
every
standing
chance we gave
project.
you. Why are you here?
It offered therapy,
Because
art
I'm out of
programs,
options,
and
he
shelter
said,
to
his
those
voice
facing
breaking.
emotional abuse
They'll
and
hurt me,
family
Lydia.
trauma.
You don't understand.
New volunteers
I stared at
came.
him, really scared.
Donations flowed in.
There were dark
And the
circles
same
under his
community
eyes,
that once
his
whispered
hands
behind her
trembling.
back now celebrated
For a
her
moment,
courage.
I saw a flicker of the boy
One
he used to be
afternoon,
scared,
a journalist
lost,
asked her,
small. What do you think kept you going? I remembered the years of manipulation. Lydia smiled gently. The way he smirked when Mom cried. Not in others, in God, and in the quiet voice that told me my story wasn't over yet. You can't just turn your back on family. She sat again by her window, ocean breeze brushing through her hair. I stepped closer. The moonlight shimmered across the water, that word painting silver streaks of peace. But family isn't she whispered from, not to the sea, but to herself. They told my brother he could move in. You've changed. But maybe. No, I was the one who moved on. I just stopped. Her lips curved in a peaceful smile. He tried. The tide whispered back, calm and endless, like the sound of closure. At one point, a year later, the still-standing foundation hosted its first national exhibit. Hundreds of paintings from survivors around the country. The man who, as Lydia stood before the final piece, her own, titled The Home Within, she felt Ethan's presence beside her. He looked healthier, steadier. Walked inside. It's beautiful, he said softly. He stayed there for almost an hour. It's hours. Shouting, crying, and as cameras clicked and people applauded, finally, Lydia felt no pride, no pain, only gratitude. Because the home she'd fought to protect wasn't just made of walls and windows. He left. It was made of truth, of peace, of love reborn through understanding. Unreadable. She turned toward the audience, her heart light. Then why doesn't it feel right? For the first time in her life, he sighed. Lydia Hale wasn't surviving her story. Right thing often feels wrong. She was living it, but that's fully, freely, fearlessly. I wanted to believe she knew was the real victory. But as the night wore on and the sound of waves filled the house, a strange fear began to grow inside me, a whisper I couldn't silence. What if Ethan's story wasn't just another lie? What if this time, the danger he spoke of was real? And if it was, what kind of storm had I just invited toward my home? That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face, pale, frantic, trembling. Not the manipulator I knew, but someone cornered, hunted. I told myself it was just another performance. He'd always been good at using fear as a stage. Still, my chest felt tight, my mind replaying his last words on the porch. You don't understand, they'll hurt me. When the storm rolled in around 2 a.m., thunder echoing across the waves, I sat up in bed. The beach house shuddered under the wind, and something in that sound felt wrong, like the world was holding its breath. I checked my phone. No messages. No missed calls. Just silence. The next morning, the sky was gray, the sea restless. Dad was in the living room, sipping tea, watching the news. You look like you didn't sleep, he said gently. I didn't. He nodded slowly, eyes never leaving the TV. I've been thinking about him too. He's fine, I said quickly. He always lands on his feet. Maybe, he murmured, but this time I don't know. He sounded different when he called last. You talked to him again. He hesitated. Before he came here, he said they took his car, that they wanted collateral. Collateral, I frowned. What kind? Dad looked at me with tired eyes. He didn't say, just that they knew where you lived. The mug slipped slightly in my hand, spilling tea onto my sleeve. What? He said he never meant to involve you, but he'd been desperate. My pulse pounded in my ears. You're telling me people who threaten him might show up here. Dad looked ashamed. I thought he was exaggerating. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I drove into town, rain streaking across my windshield. I stopped at the old cafe where Ethan used to meet his friends, the kind of place that smelled like burnt coffee and secrets. The barista recognized me. Hey, Lydia, haven't seen you in a while. You seen Ethan? He hesitated. Yeah, a couple weeks ago. Looked rough. He was with two guys. One had a scar over his eyebrow, the other kept checking the door. Do you know their names? Nah, but he left in a hurry. They didn't look friendly. I thanked him and left, heart hammering. Outside, a gust of wind ripped through the street, scattering leaves and wrappers. I leaned against my car, staring at the gray horizon, the sound of waves faint in the distance. For the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, genuine fear. Not for Ethan. For the fact that his chaos might finally touch the one place I thought was safe. When I got home, Mom was packing the kitchen. "Where were you?" she demanded. "Finding answers." "Lydia, there was a car parked outside the house earlier. Black SUV. No one got out, but it just sat there for nearly an hour." "Did you get the plate?" "No, I didn't want to look suspicious." I felt the blood drain from my face. It was happening. "Mom, lock the doors. Don't open for anyone." "You think?" "Just do it." She obeyed instantly, and for the first time, I saw real fear in her eyes, the kind of fear that mothers usually hide. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep again. Every creak of the house, every howl of the wind made me sit upright. By 3 a.m., I was packing, phone in hand, ready to call the police, though I didn't even know what I'd tell them. Then, headlights flashed outside. My heart froze. A car, dark, slow, pulled up near the gate. I turned off the lights, peeking through the blinds. 2 figures stepped out. One tall, one heavy-set. They stood there, looking at the house like hunters studying prey. I grabbed my phone and hit record. One of them said something, too quiet to hear, then threw a crumpled envelope over the fence. They got back in the car and drove off. I waited a full 5 minutes before going outside. The envelope lay in the wet grass. My name was written on it, Lydia, in Ethan's messy handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a single note, scrawled in black ink. "I'm sorry. If they come, don't let them in. They want more than money." And below that, an address. Downtown, a motel. By morning, the storm had passed, but my mind was still a whirlwind. Dad wanted to call the police immediately. Mom wanted to pack and leave. But I couldn't run, not again. If Ethan had dragged me into his mess, I needed to face it head on. "You're not going," Dad said firmly when I grabbed my keys. "I am," I said, "because if I don't, they'll keep coming." "You don't even know who they are." "Exactly." He looked at me for a long time, then sighed. "You have your mother's stubbornness. And your sense of timing," I said with a faint smile. He almost smiled back, but there was no humor in it. "Be careful, Lydia." The motel was the kind of place where time went to die, flickering neon lights, peeling paint, silence heavy as dust. "Room 11, that's what the note said." I knocked once. No answer. Twice. Still nothing. I turned the handle. It was unlocked. Inside, chaos. A suitcase overturned, clothes scattered, the faint smell of cigarettes and panic. And on the bed, another note. This one wasn't from Ethan. "You owe us now. He told us where to find you." My heart slammed against my ribs. Under the note was something else, a photo. Me, standing outside my beach house. The shot was recent. I stumbled back, hands trembling. Whoever these people were, they'd been watching me. Waiting. I called the police right there, reporting everything, the threats, the car, the motel. The officer who arrived took my statement seriously. "We've had reports about similar cases," he said. "Loan sharks mostly. They use intimidation to pressure family members. Sometimes they escalate. You did the right thing." But when he looked at the photo, his expression shifted slightly. This was taken with a telephoto lens, from a distance, professional. Meaning they're organized. That word hit harder than I expected. Back home, the police patrol passed twice that evening. Mom clung to my arm during dinner. Dad sat silent, eyes fixed on the window. The house felt like it was holding its breath again. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my brother, my own blood, could have dragged us this deep. And yet, beneath the fear, something else stirred. Resolve. Because I'd spent my whole life letting other people's chaos define me. But this time, the storm wasn't going to swallow me whole. This time, I was ready to fight back. At 11:43 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You think the police can help you. You have something we want. And then a photo attachment. My father, sitting in the garden earlier that day, taken from the woods behind the house. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was personal. And as I stared at that photo, one truth became crystal clear. This was Ethan's mess anymore. This was mine. And I was done being the victim in my own story. The sea was calm that night, but inside Lydia, a quiet storm lingered. Ethan's arrest hadn't brought her peace, only silence. And silence, she realized, could be both healing and haunting. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor like forgiveness she hadn't yet earned. The air smelled of salt and fresh coffee. For the first time in months, Lydia felt safe enough to breathe deeply, but she also knew the aftermath of truth was never clean. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A message from Officer Harper blinked across the screen. He's been charged with document forgery. He'll be held until trial. You might receive a call from your parents soon. Be ready. Be ready. Those 2 words felt heavier than any courtroom. Hours later, the phone did ring, this time her father. She hesitated before answering. Dad. He didn't waste time. What did you do, Lydia? She exhaled slowly. I protected what's mine. You humiliated your brother. You dragged this family's name through the mud. She tried to keep her voice even. Dad, he tried to sell my house. You could have handled it quietly, he snapped. Now the whole town is talking about us. Lydia closed her eyes. The us he spoke of never really included her. It was always about their image, their pride, their golden son. I'm done protecting lies, Dad, she whispered. If you care more about gossip than truth, that's on you. There was silence, a long, deep one. Then her father said, almost softly, Your mother's not well. She's been having chest pains since last night. You should come home. Her stomach dropped. Is she okay? He hesitated. Doctors are running tests, just come. Without thinking twice, Lydia grabbed her keys and drove. The sky was gray again, the ocean rough, nature mirroring the ache inside her chest. At the hospital, her mother lay in a white bed, pale and small under the fluorescent light. Lydia approached slowly, afraid that one wrong word could break her mother's fragile calm. Mom, she whispered. Her mother opened her eyes, and for the first time in years, there was no disappointment in them, only exhaustion. You came, she said softly. Of course I did. Her mother took Lydia's hand weakly. I didn't want it to end like this. Your father, he doesn't understand what love looks like when it's not control. Lydia blinked back tears. You don't have to explain, Mom, just rest. But her mother shook her head. You need to know something about Ethan. Lydia froze. Her mother's voice trembled. We didn't send him to your house out of pity. We sent him because we were afraid. Afraid of what? She coughed, her breath shallow. He was in debt, dangerous people. He owed over $40,000. They threatened him and us. He begged your father to let him stay with you, said he'd behave. But when your father refused, he promised to find a way himself. Lydia's heart sank. He used my house to cover his mess. Her mother nodded weakly. He thought if he could sell it fast, he'd save himself. Your father thought family meant forgiveness, but Ethan saw opportunity. Lydia stepped back, her mind spinning. So you knew he was in trouble. You all lied to me. Tears streamed down her mother's face. We thought we could fix it quietly. I didn't know it would go this far. Later that evening, Lydia stood outside the hospital, the cool wind brushing her hair back as she watched the sunset bleed into the horizon. Everything made sense now, the manipulation, the guilt, the way her parents had chosen silence over truth. They weren't just blind, they were scared. She understood them, maybe even forgave them, but forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. That night, she returned to her beach house, her fortress of solitude, her battle-scarred sanctuary. She walked through every room slowly, touching walls, furniture, the familiar scent of salt and wood. The space no longer felt haunted. It felt earned. When she reached her office, her laptop pinged with a new email, subject line. You think you've won. It was from Ethan. Lydia's pulse quickened as she opened it. Inside was a single sentence. You don't know the whole story, sis, and when it comes out, you'll wish you never crossed me. Attached was a short audio clip. Her hands shook as she pressed play. A man's voice, not Ethan's, spoke coldly. You've got 48 hours to return the money, or we come for your family. Understand? Then Ethan's trembling voice replied. I told you I'll get it. My sister has property. She owes me after what Dad did. The call ended. Lydia froze. This wasn't just betrayal, this was a threat. The debt her mother had spoken of wasn't just a financial mistake. Ethan was entangled with criminals. And now, they might come after her too. The next morning, she drove straight to Officer Harper's office again. Harper listened intently as Lydia played the audio. The officer's expression darkened. This changes things. We'll add extortion and criminal conspiracy to the file. You'll need protection until the case settles. Lydia nodded. I'm not leaving my home again. If he wants to drag danger into my life, I'll face it head on. Harper sighed. You're brave, but be smart. I'll send a patrol near your area for a few nights. As Lydia left, she felt an unexpected strength rising inside her. For the first time, fear didn't paralyze her, it focused her. That evening, as she sat on the porch watching the tide rise, her phone buzzed again, a text from her father. Ethan called from jail. He says he's sorry, he's terrified, we don't know what to believe anymore. Lydia stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Let him face what he created. Maybe that's the only way he'll ever change. Her father didn't reply, and she didn't expect him to. Some lessons, she thought, can only be learned through silence. At midnight, rain began to pour. Lydia stood by the window, the storm thrumming like a heartbeat through the glass. She thought of her family, her mother recovering, her father clinging to pride, her brother behind bars. And then she thought of herself, still standing, scarred but steady. This house had witnessed her pain, her fear, her breakdowns, but now it was witnessing her rise. She whispered softly, "This ends with me." No more guilt. No more rescuing people who didn't want saving. No more shrinking to make others comfortable. Her phone buzzed one last time, a voicemail from Ethan, left hours earlier. Lydia, I didn't mean for this to happen. I messed up, I thought I could fix it. Tell Mom I'm sorry, tell Dad, never mind. I know you won't forgive me. Lydia listened in silence. When the message ended, she didn't delete it, she saved it. Not as a wound, but as a reminder. Forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was closure. And closure, she realized, didn't always come from peace. Sometimes it came from choosing to walk away. As dawn broke over the horizon, the storm finally cleared. The ocean glimmered gold under the morning light. Lydia stepped outside, barefoot, letting the sand cool her feet. Her beach house stood tall behind her, not a prison anymore, but a testament. She whispered one last truth to herself, her voice blending with the waves. Family doesn't always mean home. Sometimes, home is the part of you that refuses to break. And with that, Lydia smiled, a small, quiet smile that carried the strength of every storm she'd survived. The courtroom was colder than Lydia expected. Not because of the air conditioning, but because every seat, every whisper, every ticking second carried the chill of judgment. She sat in the second row, her palms clasped together tightly, her breathing steady but shallow. Ethan was escorted in, wrists cuffed, head lowered. He looked nothing like the charming manipulator she'd known. The arrogance that once radiated from him had faded into hollow exhaustion. His face was pale, his eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. For a fleeting second, Lydia almost pitied him. Almost. The judge's voice echoed across the room. Mr. Ethan Hale, you are charged with forgery, attempted fraud, and defamation. How do you plead? Ethan's voice cracked. Guilty. The words sliced through the silence like a blade. Lydia felt her chest tighten. It wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't even relief. It was something quieter, grief maybe. the death of what little family bond had survived. Her parents sat 2 rows behind her. Her mother's hand trembled in her lap. Her father's eyes, once fierce, looked lost. He wouldn't look at Lydia, not once. The judge continued reading formalities, sentencing deferred, restitution pending, but Lydia's mind drifted. She wasn't thinking of punishment. She was thinking of truth. Because even now, in this sterile courtroom, she still felt like everyone saw only one side of the story. The headlines had been cruel. Wealthy woman turns on her family. Daughter's revenge costs brother his freedom. No one wrote the truth, that it was Ethan's greed, not her strength, that tore them apart. When the hearing ended, Ethan turned slightly, as if searching for her face. Their eyes met for a second, his pleading, hers unreadable. Then he was led away, his shackled footsteps fading like a memory she no longer wished to keep. Outside, sunlight poured over the courthouse steps. Lydia stood still, letting the warmth hit her skin. For months, she had felt like a ghost inside her own story, but now she was real again. Alive. Officer Harper approached her, holding a small envelope. "From evidence," Harper said softly. "We found this in his cell. It's addressed to you." Lydia hesitated before taking it. The handwriting was unmistakable, Ethan. She waited until she was home to open it. Inside was a short letter. No manipulation, no excuses, just pain. "Lydia, you were right. I became everything you feared I'd be. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know I never meant to drag you down with me. I thought success meant taking shortcuts, and when I saw your life, I wanted it without earning it. I see that now. Mom used to say you were the light of this family. I was just too blinded by envy to notice. Whatever happens, don't let this destroy who you are." "Ethan." Lydia stared at the words until they blurred. Then she folded the letter carefully and placed it in her drawer, not as proof of forgiveness, but as closure. Weeks passed. The beach house slowly came back to life. The laughter of seagulls, the distant hum of waves, they felt softer now, as if the ocean itself had forgiven her too. Her mother called often, gentle and hesitant. "How are you, darling?" "I'm okay," Lydia would reply. Sometimes they talked about weather, sometimes recipes, never about Ethan. That wound was still too fresh. Her father, however, hadn't spoken to her since the trial. Until one morning, he showed up at her door. She froze when she saw him, standing on her porch, holding a single envelope and a tired smile. "Dad," she whispered. He nodded stiffly. "Can I come in?" Inside, he looked around at the walls, the kitchen, the view, as if seeing her home for the first time. "This place is beautiful," he said quietly. "It's been mine for a while," she replied. He sighed. "I know I failed you." Lydia didn't speak. She waited. He continued, voice breaking. "When Ethan started falling apart, I thought saving him would fix everything. I didn't see what it was doing to you. I thought you were strong enough to handle it. But I was wrong. You were strong because you had to be." Her throat tightened. "I just wanted you to believe me." "I do now." He set the envelope on the table. "This is from me and your mother. It's a transfer the rest of what he stole. We sold some of our land. It's yours." Lydia shook her head. "I don't want your money, Dad." "It's not money," he said softly. "It's our apology." For the first time in years, she saw something break in his eyes, not pride, but regret. It was raw, human, real. She stepped forward and hugged him, the kind of hug that doesn't erase pain, but acknowledges it. Neither spoke. The silence was enough. Days turned into weeks. Lydia started painting again, something she hadn't done since college. Her canvases filled with colors of emotion, blue for peace, crimson for pain, gold for survival. Her beach house became a gallery of her own rebirth. Then one afternoon, as she prepared tea, she found a letter slid under her door, no stamp, no name. Just one sentence written in hurried ink. "You think it's over, but Ethan wasn't the only one who owed them." Her pulse quickened. She stepped outside, no one in sight. only the wind carrying sand across the porch. She unfolded the paper again. The words were real, shaky, smudged by rain or maybe tears. Who had left it? Who else was involved? Her thoughts spiraled. She rushed inside, locking the door behind her. Could it be one of Ethan's debtors? Or someone from their past, someone her parents hadn't told her about? The calm she had built began to tremble. Once again, secrets were clawing at the edges of her peace. That night, she sat by the window, watching lightning streak across the distant horizon. The rain began softly, tapping against the glass like a warning. She whispered to herself, "If there's more truth left to find, I'll face it. I'm not running anymore." For years, Lydia had been fighting to be understood, to be seen. Now, for the first time, she was ready to fight not for her past, but for her future. The story wasn't over yet. Something deeper was still buried, something her family had never dared to tell her. And Lydia Hale was finally strong enough to dig it up. The night after the court hearing felt different. The air around Lydia's beach house, once filled with tension and echoing footsteps of her brother, now carried the rhythm of waves and peace. But peace never arrives empty-handed. It always asks for something in return. For Lydia, it demanded truth, the whole truth. She stood by the glass doors, watching moonlight ripple across the ocean. A mug of untouched tea sat cooling beside her. Inside her chest, a storm still swirled, not of anger anymore, but of unfinished emotions. Her parents hadn't called, not since the day they left the courtroom with their eyes lowered. Their pride crushed between truth and guilt. Ethan had been sentenced to house arrest with mandatory counseling. His manipulation, recorded threats, and fraudulent use of Lydia's name had been enough to strip him of credibility. He'd lost the freedom he once used to destroy hers. But Lydia couldn't celebrate. She didn't want revenge anymore. She wanted peace, real peace, the kind that didn't depend on winning or proving anyone wrong. That night, as she stood alone, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, a text. "Lydia, it's Mom. Can we come tomorrow morning? We need to talk." Her heart skipped. She didn't reply immediately. Instead, she closed her phone and whispered to herself, "Tomorrow then, let's end this right." Morning sunlight poured through her windows, soft and forgiving. Lydia set 2 cups on the coffee table, one for her mother, one for her father. The doorbell rang exactly at 10:00 a.m. When she opened the door, her parents stood there, smaller, older somehow. They weren't the same people who had once told her to give up her home for her brother. "Come in," Lydia said quietly. They walked in without speaking. Her mother's eyes darted to the walls, photos of Lydia's art students, beach sunsets, and charity projects. The house that once felt like a battlefield now looked like a gallery of healing. Her father cleared his throat first. "Lydia, I owe you an apology." Lydia didn't speak. She gestured for him to continue. He sat down slowly. "We thought we were helping your brother. He told us things, lies about you. Said you planned to sell this house and abandon us. Said you didn't care about family anymore." Her mother's voice broke in, trembling. "He even showed us fake emails, Lydia, ones where you called us burdens. We were so blind." Lydia swallowed hard. "So you believed him?" Her father nodded, eyes wet. "We did, because it was easier than facing how far he'd fallen. We didn't want to believe our son was capable of all this." Her mother began to cry softly. "He stole from you, lied to us, used our love as a weapon, and you still helped him." Lydia's hands clenched in her lap. "I tried, Mom, I really did, but sometimes love turns into chains. I had to break them to survive." Silence settled like dust. Only the sound of the waves filled the space between them. Then her father leaned forward, his voice breaking. "Will you ever forgive us?" Lydia looked at them, really looked. She saw not villains, not traitors, but people who had loved too blindly, too fearfully. And maybe that was punishment enough. "I don't know if forgiveness comes all at once," she said finally, "but I'm trying." Her mother reached for her hand. "That's all we ask." For the first time in years, Lydia didn't pull away. Weeks passed. Ethan's name faded from the news, from conversations, from the whispers of the town. Lydia returned to her art school, hosting painting classes for children who'd been through family struggles. Each brushstroke felt like a prayer, a quiet way to turn pain into something beautiful. One afternoon, after class, a little girl named Ella stayed behind. She was about 7, with curly brown hair and bright, curious eyes. "Miss Lydia," she asked, "why do you paint sunsets so much?" Lydia smiled softly. "Because sunsets remind me that endings can be beautiful too." The girl thought for a moment, then nodded. "My mom says the same thing. She says bad days are like storms, they pass if you wait." Lydia knelt beside her. "Your mom's right, and you're pretty smart for knowing that already." The girl giggled, hugging her sketchbook tight. "You're my favorite teacher." When Lydia closed the studio that evening, she felt a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. The kind that doesn't come from winning a fight, but from healing what was broken inside. That night, she stood again by her beach window. The ocean roared softly, like an old friend. She thought of her younger self, the one who had believed love meant always saying yes, always forgiving instantly, always staying even when it hurt. Now she knew better. Love wasn't blind obedience. It was truth, even when truth hurt. Her phone buzzed again, a message from her dad. "Your brother asked for counseling help. He said he wants to change. We told him to start with an apology to himself." Lydia smiled faintly. Maybe some storms really do pass. She typed a short reply. "That's good, Dad. I hope he does." Then she put her phone down and stepped outside, barefoot on the sand. The tide washed over her feet, cold, grounding, alive. For the first time in a long time, Lydia didn't feel like someone who'd lost a family. She felt like someone who had finally found herself. Weeks later, Lydia received an envelope, no return address. Inside was a small sketch, a rough, unsteady drawing of the beach house. At the bottom, scrawled in familiar handwriting, were 4 words. "I'm sorry, big sister." No signature, no apology speech, just that. Lydia stared at it for a long time, the sea wind brushing against her face. Then she smiled, not out of pity, not out of nostalgia, but out of understanding. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It frees you from living there. She placed the sketch in her art studio, right next to the window. It wasn't a trophy, it was a reminder of how far she'd come, of how pain, when faced bravely, can become purpose, of how love, when honest, can still heal what betrayal once broke. And as the evening sun melted into the sea, Lydia whispered to herself, maybe family isn't about who stays. It's about who learns to come back the right way. The waves answered, calm, endless, forgiving. And Lydia finally felt home again.